A very strange thing happened after the poem was aired on radio on April 1st, 1987, and it became obvious the story was not going to fade away. The first 2 times the song was played, there was no viewer reaction or calls. Cook and O'Malley were prepared to let the failed prank die when the phone lines started lighting up. People were calling in asking about that weird song. Listeners asked, "Who did that song on the Dogman thing?" And, "When are you going to play it again?" O'Malley took a call from an elderly man who stated that he was chilled to the bone after hearing the song because he had actually seen a similar creature years before. That was the first of many sighting reports that would pour into the station over the next few weeks. Scores of people told of stories and encounters with a creature that was very much like Cook's fabricated Dogman. Within 1 month, the legend of the Dogman became the most requested song on the air and for a short time was added into the regular rotation of the music. Other stories began to surface and be compared to the Michigan Dogman story. A century old, a mysterious Indian legend revealed shocking similarities. A French fur trader's diary from 1804 told of an encounter with loup-garou. A letter from 1857 described a creature that stood upright like a man, yet bore the countenance of a gray wolf. A real Dogman sighting investigated by Lake County Sheriff's Deputy Jeff Chamberlain, who was accompanied by Department of Natural Resources Officer Ron McCarty, was picked up and reported on by Mark Marantet, a reporter for the Cadillac Evening News. Then other news outlets picked up the story, and it was later fed down the Associated Press newswire, and thus was picked up by newspapers all across America. It was even mentioned as a strange coincidence in Paul Harvey's National News and Comments broadcast. McCarty called the TV station WTCM, stating that he and Chamberlain had openly joked about how this sighting would fit in with the 7th-year prophecy made in the song. McCarty's voice would later appear in the beginning of the 10th anniversary version of the song, The Legend 97. Suddenly, The Legend soared into national prominence and became a hit song once again, only this time on a much larger scale. Requests for copies came in from all 50 states and around the world. Eventually, the master tape, never considered to be of real value, had been destroyed, and Steve Cook went into the studio again, this time with an upgraded keyboard, and recorded the song a second time. A few changes were made to the lyrics to update The Legend for summer. When it was finished, the second master recording was shipped to Southfield, Michigan for mass production. The first 500 copies arrived a week later and sold out in 12 days. The Legend had quickly become hot property with record stores and radio stations across the country, calling the station requesting copies. A large record company offered to record and promote the song, and Steve Cook faced the difficult decision of whether to release The Legend on a national scale or to keep it local and manageable. Steve chose to keep it local. The music and lyrics were copyrighted by Mindstage Productions, Cook's marketing and advertising company. More and more copies of the tape, which was originally priced at $3 each, were sold. And in the fall of 1987, WTCM held an art contest which allowed amateur artists the chance to submit works depicting what they thought the Dogman looked like. There were over 100 entries. Some were exceptional, but by far the most chilling and dramatic was an 11 by 17 charcoal sketch done by Brian Rosinski, who was only 23 years old at the time and never had a formal art lesson. The song was never intended to be a marketable vehicle for profit, and Cook made the decision early on that any profits earned derived from its sale would be donated to charity. The first charity was the Traverse City Cherryland Humane Society, which scored $2,500 towards drilling a new water well and the remodeling of the adult dog facility, which included new floor tile and pens. In 2001, Cook was introduced to Brian Manley, founder of AC POW, a no-kill animal rescue program that specializes in lost causes. AC Paw takes in animals that have been injured, abused, or neglected, or that have used up the maximum boarding time in traditional facilities and are about to be euthanized. They rehabilitate animals through a unique foster care network and eventually place them in a loving home. Cook was so impressed with the AC Paw program, he shifted all donations from the proceeds of the legend to their cause, and thus the legend of the Dogman's legacy lives on. My dad and I have a story to tell about our encounters with the Dogman. My dad's story took place in the mid-70s. There is a cemetery behind the Alpena High School and a wooded area behind that. There are many trails that run through here. In this area is a place called the Sandies, where all the young kids would go and party. My dad and two of his buddies were in a canoe in broad daylight, paddling from the Sandies around the back of the cemetery. The banks of the river are 10 to 12 feet high in places, and some trails run right to the edge. The three of them saw what looked to be a big dog running behind them on the trail. They didn't pay much attention to it until they heard a splash. When they looked, it was swimming after them. Then it went from a dog paddle to the chest and front legs, coming out of the water and wading after them. They decided right then not to wait around to see what it was. Honestly, I thought it was BS at the time, and I'm still not sure even to this day if it was something they had been smoking or drinking. Then around 2001, 2002, I was leading some friends through the Sandies trails. I used to like taking people out there without a flashlight and tell them my dad's story to freak them out. The girls were freaked out before we even got into the woods, so I decided not to scare them that night. In the river are several islands connected by a small sliver of land. At that time there were 3 such islands chained together, and I took them through to the last one, which was planted with pines in nice even rows. I was the first one back there, about 30 seconds ahead, when one of the girls got her foot hung up on something. As I was going back to help her, there was a spot where the trees make a sort of roof effect, which is really cool looking at night with the moon shining through. At that point I saw something. I'm not sure what it was, but it sent me running out double time. When my buddy saw my face, he didn't say a word. He just followed, both of us dragging the girls behind us. When he asked me later why I came out in such a hurry, I told him it was because I thought I had seen something at the other end of the island, walking through the trees that was very tall and not likely human. He may not have believed me, but he never questioned it either. I'm still not sure what I saw. It could easily have been that I scared myself with Dad's story and was seeing things. But I know this. I still don't like the dark. And even though I love hunting, I hate going out before the sun comes up during deer season. The area around Reed City, Michigan, has been a hotbed of Dogman activity. This report details an event that occurred nearly 20 years ago, but the witness remembers it like it was yesterday and is unshakable in her story. Her name is Courtney, and her encounter took place during the winter of 1993-94. Courtney was a teenager at the time and was sneaking cigarettes behind her parents' home near Todd Lake, northeast of Reed City. The sun was setting on a clear, cold winter day. Courtney was facing a large abandoned barn on the property next door. The barn had always kind of spooked me. It was filled with rusty old equipment. The outer planks were all rotten, and it sagged and leaned in every direction. My dad said to stay away, as the whole thing could collapse. On that evening, I was standing about 50 feet from the barn and saw sunlight coming through the gaps in the siding. Courtney took her eyes off the barn for a few minutes. Then something caught her attention again. There was some movement. The light flickered, but I couldn't really tell what it was. Then it turned its head back and looked straight at me. It was at least 6 feet tall, if not more. It was dark-colored. It had a dog-like appearance, pointy nose, and really big, pointy ears. Courtney dashed into her house to grab a flashlight. When she returned outside, she shined it toward the barn door, but the animal was no longer there. She walked closer to the barn to look for tracks in the heavy snow. When she didn't see any, she realized the creature might still be inside, and ran back to the safety of the house. She never saw the creature again. She later talked to a neighbor who had seen something, the size of a buffalo but the shape of a dog, in the same barn a few months before Courtney's encounter. The neighbor said she had been so frightened she was near hysterics for days. Her father had taken his gun and searched the barn, but found nothing there. At the time of these events, neither of the girls had heard of the legend song and did not know about the Michigan Dogman legend until years later. This report comes to us from an anonymous contributor who grew up in Sheboygan County but spent many summers camping on family property in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. This encounter took place in the area of Watersmeet, home of the famous Paulding Lights phenomenon. Oddly enough, the Paulding Lights are also known as the Dog Meadow Lights. I was 13, had just gotten new rollerblades for Christmas, and since the main road where our property sits is paved, I couldn't wait to ride around. I went blading by myself and stopped to rest for a second. On this road, the woods are so thick, there's not much space between the road and the woods in most parts, and I remember seeing trees pushed down on the road that my dad said was done by bears. He was an avid bear hunter. I remember not hearing any of your normal sounds of nature, not even birds. The air was still, and the sky would be pure dark in not too long. I was deciding to turn back when I heard a rustling behind me, and something emerged from the left side of the road. I assumed it was a deer, and paused and made myself as quiet as I could so I could watch it, and slumped down on my stomach in the middle of the road. It was about 600 feet ahead of me. When I got myself settled in the road to watch it and looked up, I realized what I was looking at wasn't a deer. It was on all fours, with gray-brown fur. At first, I feared the worst, thinking a bear had caught my scent, until I saw its outline and color. I thought I was looking at a dog until I realized the face was too primitive, like a fox or a coyote's. At this point in my life, I had never seen a wolf in real life, and it was too far for me to make out the face exactly. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources has always recognized that wild wolves still roamed in Upper Peninsula, although they were thought to be in very limited numbers and only in extremely remote areas. It is conceivable this witness was seeing one of these wolves, but then something very strange happened. It extended its front legs, and in the slowest, longest seconds of my life, stood up on its hind legs, sniffed the air, walked for about 5 steps, then got back down on all fours and walked to the other side of the woods, then disappeared. I don't remember how long I laid in the middle of the road staring in the empty space. I saw this thing stand like a human. I remember my jaw hanging down as low as it could, and a pool of drool on the cement under it. It finally clicked in my mind that perhaps I should rollerblade my butt back to camp as quick as I could. The witness reports that while the creature never stalked or pursued her, she slept very little during the rest of the family camping trip. She never told anyone about what she had seen, fearing she would be ridiculed. At the time of the sighting, she had never heard of the legend song and would not until 2004. She moved to Southern California in 2008 and has no interest in camping ever again. When I was a boy, my father was the night watchman at a manufacturing plant located in a rural area between Big Rapids and Chippewa Lake, Michigan. Our house, which, if I remember right, was a perk of the night watchman job, was across the street from the factory. The plant building was right next to a large wilderness area of state land. At that time, it was simply known as the Haymarsh, but now it is officially called the Haymarsh State Game Area. We didn't understand it at the time, but Dad was always very skittish about letting us play outside after dark. He would sometimes talk about hearing coyotes or bears roaming around in the haymarsh when he was walking the perimeter of the building at night. One night in the summer of 1961, Dad walked back to the house to sit on the porch and have a cup of coffee and a sweet roll. He had a good view of the entire plant property. He saw some movement near a chain link fence behind the building. This was approximately 3 a.m., so he felt quite sure this person wasn't there by accident. He drew his gun and watched for a few minutes. That's when he noticed this was not a person at all, but something much taller. He said it appeared to be covered in brown-gray hair. It had very broad shoulders and a powerful chest. It alternated between walking on 4 legs, then standing up on 2. He said it seemed to be looking for something along the driveway. He said later, he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He quietly moved into the house and grabbed his Kodak Signet 35mm camera, which was his pride and joy. At this point, I should mention that Dad was quite a photography buff. His father had owned one of the first camera stores in Ohio, and Dad got the shutterbug from Grandpa. As he stepped back onto the front porch, the creature moved slowly along the driveway, directly under the lights. He adjusted the camera shutter for a long exposure, held it as still as he could. He said he was shaking pretty bad by then, and snapped a picture. I've enclosed a print of it in this letter. Dad said a few seconds later, the thing dropped back down to all 4s and slowly moved off into the woods. He sent a print to the local newspaper and sent copies to several magazines. One that I think was called Mysterian published the photo in their spring issue of 1962. Dad had a copy of the magazine for years, but it was misplaced after he passed away. I still have the negative strip that contains this image, if you would like to have someone examine it. I also still have Dad's Kodak Signet. I haven't shot any pictures with it for several years, but I'm pretty sure it still works. The situation started last Saturday night around midnight, when he was coming home from a friend's house in Benzonia and taking the back way home to Traverse City. He stated that while traveling down Cinder Road, several miles outside of the town of Bendon, he observed a pair of eyes reflecting off his headlights ahead of him. Thinking that it was probably a deer alongside of the road, he began to slow down. As he got closer, however, he stated that the object was much larger and much darker than a deer. He said that by this time, he had slowed to around 30 miles per hour and was at that point several hundred feet from the creature, which still hadn't moved. As he approached further, he stated that the only way he could describe the creature was being similar to a very large, dark wolf. However, he observed that this thing wasn't on 4 legs, but was upright, his back 2 legs standing near a road-killed deer. He estimated that the creature stood a little over 6 feet tall and had very dark fur. He stated that by now, he was going slow enough to bring his truck to a stop in the road and observe the creature, which had not yet moved and was still staring at him. He told me that for a brief second, he believed that the object was a giant stuffed animal put there as some kind of joke due to the fact that he had never seen anything like this in his life, and that he was able to drive up on it as close as he was without it having moved an inch. He told me, however, that before he could finish that thought, the creature then dropped to all 4 legs and sprinted across the road and disappeared into the woods on the other side of the roadway. He told me that he stayed frozen in his seat for a minute, wondering in the middle of the road of what the heck had just happened. I jokingly asked him if he had been drinking that night, and with a deadly serious face, he stated, "No. Whatever that was, it was for real." As perplexed as he was that night over what he had seen, he was deathly afraid to go wandering into the woods to investigate further. He said that in using a flashlight, He observed an animal's tracks leading into the woods on the opposite side of the road, and was fortunate enough that night to have his digital camera with him. He showed me a photograph of the paw print, which he said appeared to be about 7 or 8 inches long. He had another picture of the same paw print, where he placed a shotgun shell in the middle of it for scale. He told me that he was lucky that the side of the road was so soft, because he wasn't willing to go any farther than 2 or 3 steps away from the door to his truck to get a picture. I inquired if the animal had made any sounds before it disappeared, and he said that he did not hear it make any noise, and were it not for the picture, he would have thought that he had imagined the whole thing. I asked him if it could have been a bear, and he stated, absolutely not. He bear hunts every year in the Upper Peninsula, so he obviously knows what bears look like up close. That's his story. Believe it if you like. If I didn't know him as well as I do and hadn't seen the pictures, I would have said that he was out of his mind. I've heard the song and know some of the stories, but always believed it was just for entertainment value. After this happened, though, I'm looking at all of this under a whole new light.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
The Gable film. In an estate sale, an old film was found in a box. After viewing it, a home video of a strange attack was discovered. The film shows a young boy filming normal family stuff until a truck ride passing by a field shows a creature of some sort. They stop the truck and film the creature until it charges to attack. The attack is somewhat caught on tape and even shows the mouth of the animal. The mouth rules out ape and dog origin. Some people claim this is the Dogman. In early 1994, a car on Lakeshore Drive was involved in a collision with a large animal. The occupants of the vehicle were uninjured, and police were reported to have determined it was a deer strike. Witnesses said there was gray fur all over the front of the wrecked vehicle, but no blood or animal carcass was found. One witness was reported to say, the driver couldn't even explain what he hit. According to eyewitnesses, a creature fitting the description of the Dogman appeared in Grand Haven from 1993 to 1994. Ben, who was a young teenager at the time, saw the creature not once, but 3 times, and believes each time he was seeing another individual in what could have been a pack-taking refuge in Hoffman Nature Preserve. In 1993, after dark, Ben was hiking the trails in Hoffman Nature Preserve with as many as 4 friends. Just passing the float bridge near the center of the preserve, he heard a sound to his right. He spied what resembled to be a dog appear from behind a tree on a ridge above. I thought it was just a dog walking, and then it stood up on its hind legs, he recalled, mostly in silhouette, between him and the moon no more than 70 feet away. Ben realized due to its size, over 7 feet tall, and human-like outline, it was not just a dog. The Dogman is reported to have a canine-like head, human-like body, and walks upright. It was on 2 legs, very tall but hunched over. It was covered in thick black hair. The eyes reflected the light, just like a raccoon or dog's eyes would. One eyewitness reported, who saw the creature at night along a wooded road in northern Michigan. Incident occurred late July 2008, approximately 1 o'clock a.m. The neighbor's dog started barking and running back and forth along the side of our houses. After 15 minutes, I became weary from the noise and got out of bed to take a look at what was causing the commotion. It was a clear, warm night without cloud cover, and I don't remember seeing the moon. I slid open the sliding door from our bedroom to the backyard and patio pool area. I turned left towards my neighbor's house, which is about 15-20 feet from my bedroom. There is a concrete enclosure next to our bedroom that houses the air conditioner and pool machinery. As I stepped out of the bedroom and took a couple of steps, I was greeted by guttural growl coming from the other side of the enclosure that I could not see. It was frightening and froze me in my tracks. I was scared. I have never heard anything like it except in the Hollywood werewolf movies. It was definitely saying, "Don't make another move, or else you get ripped apart, you will die." At least that's what I felt. I was born and raised in Detroit and lived on the near west side on 12th Street in Burlingame. We had rough, tough guys in those days, and a white boy living in a black neighborhood is something like daily combat. I didn't scare easily, but I was terrified this night. I didn't see anything the next morning, such as tracks on the pavement. It was not feline, nor was it a bear, both of which can be found where we live. Also, it was not a coyote, which I have seen many in the early AM, out hunting as close as 10 feet away, carrying small prey in their mouths. I used to take my wife for medical treatment 3 times a week at 3:00 a.m. for 8 years, so I had my encounters with these animals, and I repeat, a coyote. It was not. I know I could have taken 10 or 15 steps and found out what the mystery was. However, Mama didn't raise no fool, and I didn't have a Colt 45 with 6 silver in the chamber and 6 silver in a speed loader, so I let it slide. There was one reported incident in the 1980s in Valencia, which is next to Castaic, where my family was living. A couple of teenage boys were camping out one night and were harried by what they reported to the police as a dogman-like creature that stood upright and ran on 2 feet and was covered with dark, shaggy hair. That's my story. It is nothing but the truth. I was born in Detroit and lived there until 1966, when I moved to California, and I never heard anything about the Dogman. My cousin attended Ferris State in Big Rapids, and he never mentioned the Dogman legend to me. In addition, I went to summer camp in Port Huron one year when I was in high school, Camp Ozenham or something like that spelling, and this was the perfect place for a dogman to live, but nothing was ever mentioned about. Michigan is a perfect place for a dogman creature to live. Plenty of green and fresh water with a moderate population, as opposed to CA, where fresh water would definitely be a major problem for survival. Sparta, 1987. One weekend back around fall 1987, my 2 best friends and I were staying at my family's cabin, which is not far from the small town of Sparta, about 20 minutes north of Grand Rapids. My 2 friends left to have dinner while I stayed behind at the cabin. Following the dinner, the men headed back towards Sparta and the cabin. What happened next would shock and disturb them for years. It was dark, and they were on a rural road. Suddenly, both of them saw something standing by the side of the road. In the headlights of the car, it appeared to be a human-like figure covered in gray fur. As they got closer and past the figure, both of them got a very good look at it. It was the size of a man, stood on 2 legs. It was covered head to toe in gray fur, and had a wolf-like face. It even raised its hands and seemed to snarl at them as they drove by. They said it looked like a werewolf out of a Hollywood movie. My 2 friends didn't dare stop. They continued driving. And of course, they were peppering each other with questions. Did you see that too? Was that a dog? Was that someone dressed up in a costume? And so on. As they are having this animated conversation, they pass by the sign that says, "Welcome to Sparta," and drove through the small main street and continued on out of the town in the direction of my cabin. Their conversation about what had just happened continued, when both of them looked up to see that same "Welcome to Sparta" sign again, followed by the same main street that they had just driven through only moments ago. They hadn't stopped or turned around. They had been traveling in the same direction on the same road, But somehow, without any noticeable interruption in their journey, they had somehow been sent backwards several miles. Until this point, it would be easy to dismiss this event as someone playing a joke. However, the time displacement characteristic is what sets this encounter apart. While such things are well documented in UFO and alien abduction stories, it's something we've not seen before in Dogman sighting reports. Andy continues, "I remember when they finally showed up at my cabin. They arrived no later than what I expected them to, around 9 p.m. or so. And I remember how animated they were about their strange encounter, but I just assumed they had seen a large dog and were telling me an embellished story in order to get a laugh. But 20 years later, both of them still insist that this was no joke. I have no idea what to make of this story. Maybe it was just some teenagers in a werewolf costume playing pranks. And did my friends really experience lost time afterwards? Or did they just make some wrong turns on their drive and didn't notice because they were talking and distracted? I have no idea, but I would love to know if anyone else has seen similar things in the Sparta area."
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
In 1987, disc jockey Steve Cook at WTCM-FM in Traverse City, Michigan, recorded a song titled "The Legend," which he initially played as an April Fool's Day joke. He based the songs on actual reports of the creature. Cook recorded the song with a keyboard backing and credited it to Bob Farley. After he played the song, Cook received calls from listeners who said that they had encountered a similar creature. In the next weeks after Cook first played the song, it was the most requested song on the station. He also sold cassettes of the songs for $4 and donated proceeds from the single to an animal shelter. Over the years, Cook has received more than 100 reports of the creature's existence. In March 2010, the creature was featured in an episode of Monster Quest. Cook later added verses to the song 1997 after hearing a report of an animal break-in by an unknown canine at a cabin in Luther, Michigan. He re-recorded it again in 2007 with a mandolin backing. In 1961, the manufacturing plant was situated near a large wilderness area called the Haymarsh in Big Rapids, Michigan. The watchman was provided housing right across the street from the plant and oftentimes conducted guard duty from his porch. He recalled times when he patrolled the plant's perimeter fence at night, regularly hearing coyotes, bears, and other strange sounds out in the darkness at night. Certainly, that would be enough to put anyone on edge and want to stay in the safety of your porch rather than going into the darkness. One night at 3 a.m. during a routine shift on his porch, he heard rustling along the perimeter of the fence near the back of the plant. Drawing his gun, he observed the area around him for a few minutes. A figure then emerged from the darkness. The watchman described this creature as being covered in fur and was much taller than a normal human and had very broad shoulders. To top it off, its face appeared canine with a long snout. The creature switched between being on all fours and on its hind legs as it made its way along the perimeter fence. Instead of firing his gun, the guard ran inside to grab his camera. When he returned, the creature was now prowling its way along the plant's driveway, directly under a lamppost. It was then that the watchman managed to take a picture using a long exposure method, due to the low lighting. After this, the creature retreated into the Haymarsh. Last fall, my son and I were driving on US 41 M28 towards Three Lakes in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where I live. The beast ran across the highway near Tioga Creek. I had not heard of this before reading Phantoms and Monsters, but this is exactly what we saw. We are familiar with all animals living here. Moose regularly cross in front of drivers, so we watch the sides of the roads carefully. We were very puzzled and thought it might be some mutant wolf and could not figure out what we witnessed. It ran fairly fast, about 50 feet in front of our truck. It was so strange because the front of it was much higher up than the back, larger than a wolf. It did not look exactly like the video or drawings I saw, but very close. The side view shape of the animal was almost like an ape shape, with the front legs longer than the back legs, which made it run funny. It ran like a bear runs, with the exception of the back legs being shorter, if you can picture that. The front, from the angle I saw, looked like it must have had a wide chest. The head appeared wolf-like, but it definitely was not a wolf. The color was brown and black mixed. The hair seemed medlong, like a wolf, and I remember thinking it might have had mange, must have had patches of hair missing. I was telling my son, who is 13, about what I had found on your site and asked him what he remembered. He gave the same description, how very strange and out of place it was. He said that this spring he saw the same type of thing on a logging road near our house. I do remember him telling me that at that time, and it was the same thing. He was riding his dirt bike. We live in an extremely remote area, and it ran across the trail. I know where he is talking about because I pick berries there, and do get a weird feeling like something is watching me. A neighbor told me that area is Bigfoot Central, which I did not know or believe. But after doing further research today, there are a lot of reports of strange creatures in this area that go back many, many years. In Michigan's rugged wilderness, where the trees loom tall and the air hangs heavy with the scent of pine, there lies a story that has haunted the region for decades, a tale of terror, of a creature that prowls the depths of the forest, preying on those who dare to tread its sacred ground. It was October 1st, 1970, when a group of 10 lumberjack men went deep into the heart of the Michigan woods, their axes gleaming in the dappled sunlight as they set about their work. Little did they know, they were about to encounter a force of pure malevolence that would forever alter the course of their lives. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows lengthened, the men made camp for the night, their laughter and banter filling the air as they gathered around the crackling fire. But as darkness fell and the forest grew silent, a sense of unease settled over the group, a feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. It began with a low growl, a primal sound that sent shivers down their spines. At first, they dismissed it as the rumblings of a distant bear, but as the night wore on, the growls grew closer, more menacing, until they seemed to surround them on all sides. The men huddled together, their faces pale with fear, as a massive shape emerged from the darkness, a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Standing on two legs like a man, yet covered in fur like a beast, its eyes glowed with a fierce intelligence as it fixed its gaze upon the trembling group. With a blood-curdling roar, the creature lunged forward, its massive claws tearing through the air with deadly precision. The men fought back with all their strength, their axes swinging in a desperate bid for survival, but the creature seemed impervious to their blows, its strength and ferocity unmatched. For days, the men endured a living nightmare, their every move shadowed by the relentless pursuit of the creature that stalked them through the darkened woods. With each passing hour, their numbers dwindled, their once bold spirits broken by the unyielding terror that surrounded them. As the days turned into nights, and the nights into endless torment, the men began to lose hope, their minds fraying at the edges as they succumbed to exhaustion and fear. Yet still, they pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive, no matter the cost. But as the creature closed in, its eyes gleaming with hunger and madness, the men knew that their time was running out. In one final, desperate act of defiance, they rallied together, their voices raised in a chorus of defiance as they faced down the beast that had haunted their nightmares. And in that moment, as the moon hung low in the ski and the forest echoed with the sounds of their struggle, the men fought with a bravery born of desperation, their cries of defiance echoing through the night as they clashed with the creature that had become their tormentor. But whether they emerged victorious or succumbed to the darkness that lurked within the Michigan woods, one thing was certain. The legend of the Dogman would endure, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond the edges of our reality, waiting to strike when we least expect it. Michigan on April 22nd in 1990, two intrepid friends, Malcolm and Marcus, were on a journey that would forever alter their perceptions of the world. Renowned for their fascination with the legend of the Dogman sightings, they received a cryptic message from an elderly man named Pat Morrison, claiming to possess a video documenting a horrifying encounter with the creature. Initially skeptical yet intrigued, Malcolm and Marcus decided to enter into the unknown, drawn by the promise of unearthly footage that defied rational explanation. As they arrived at Pat Morrison's secluded home, they were met with a warm welcome that belied the impending terror that awaited them. Seated in the dimly lit living room, Pat Morrison retrieved his old video camera, his weathered hands trembling with a mixture of anticipation and dread. With a solemn warning of the horrors they were about to witness, he pressed play, unleashing a sequence of events that would forever haunt the minds of those who dared to watch. The first video revealed mundane scenes of Pat's meticulously tended garden, a stark contrast to the impending nightmare that lurked just beyond the edges of the frame. As the footage progressed, Pat showcased his collection of firearms, his jovial demeanor masking the impending horror that lurked just beneath the surface. It was the third video that shattered their disbelief, as a deafening gunshot echoed through the air, followed by the startled retreat of wolves into the depths of the forest. Pat's laughter and taunts echoed through the darkness, but Malcolm and Marcus noticed one wolf lingering, its gaze fixed upon the old man with an unsettling intensity. Their hearts pounding in their chests, Malcolm and Marcus watched in horror as the next video unfolded, revealing Pat cowering behind makeshift barricades, his breath ragged with fear. The camera captured the menacing silhouette of a wolf-like creature, its eyes glinting with malevolence as it tore through the door with unnatural strength. With each passing moment, the tension mounted as the creature prowled through the house with a predatory grace. Malcolm and Marcus felt their skin crawl as the creature's movements grew increasingly erratic, its presence a palpable manifestation of primal terror. As dawn approached, Pat emerged from his hiding place, his nerves frayed and his spirit shattered by the encounter. The creature had vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction and unspeakable horror. As the video came to an end, Malcolm and Marcus sat in stunned silence, their minds reeling from the sheer magnitude of what they had witnessed. They thanked Pat for his bravery in sharing his ordeal, knowing that they would carry the weight of his harrowing experience with them forever. As they left Pat's home, the sun rose over the Michigan landscape, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. But for Malcolm and Marcus, the darkness of the night had left an indelible mark on their souls, a reminder of the terrifying truth that lurked just beyond the edges of reality. Hello everyone, I'm currently in Michigan, visiting some close relatives. Before coming here, I had some good ideas for a Dogman story upload, so I was able to get in contact with some people from Reddit and off Facebook, asking if they would like to share any stories regarding the Michigan Dogman. I managed to get 5 stories, but I have to warn you, it's pretty chilling and fucked up. With that being said, I hope that you enjoy. This story comes from a woman on Reddit telling her story about how her friend went missing and disappeared playing in the Michigan woods. When I was just 10, I had a friend named Sarah, and together we spent countless hours exploring the woods near our homes. But one day at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I think, our game of hide and seek we played many times would lead to a terrifying encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. When Sarah and I ventured into the woods, our laughter echoing through the trees as we raced deeper into the wilderness. We were so caught up in our game that we didn't realize just how far we had strayed from the safety of the familiar paths. As I counted to 10, Sarah darted off into the underbrush, her giggles fading into the distance. But when I reached the count of 10 and set off in search of her, I quickly realized that she was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped my heart as I called out her name, my voice lost in the vast expanse of the forest. I searched frantically for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest as fear clawed at my insides. But despite my efforts, there was no sign of Sarah, and I soon found myself hopelessly lost in the tangled maze of trees. Exhausted and afraid, I eventually succumbed to sleep, my dreams haunted by visions of my missing friend. When I awoke, the forest was bathed in the soft light of dawn, but the peace was shattered by the frantic shouts of my parents and Sarah's family searching for us. I stumbled towards the sound of their voices, tears streaming down my cheeks as I recounted the events of the previous day. But it was the whispered mention of the Dogman that sent shivers down my spine, filling me with a sense of dread, unlike anything I had ever known. The police arrived soon after, their grim faces betraying the seriousness of the situation. They searched the woods with a fine-tooth comb, but there was no sign of Sarah, save for the unrecognizable tracks that marred the forest floor. To this day, I still wonder what became of my dear friend, lost to the depths of the forest and the sinister creature that lurks within. And though I may never know the truth, the memory of that day will forever haunt me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the Michigan woods. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, my uncle and I set out on our fishing trip near the secluded riverbanks of Michigan. The air was crisp with the promise of twilight, and I couldn't shake the feeling of excitement coursing through my veins as we made our way down the winding trail. But as we walked, I couldn't help but notice the unease that seemed to settle over my uncle like a dark cloud. He glanced around nervously, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow as if expecting something to leap out at us from the depths of the woods. "Uncle, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. He paused, his gaze fixed on a cluster of trees just ahead, before shaking his head and muttering something about being cautious in unfamiliar territory. But I could sense that there was more to his paranoia than he was letting on, and a chill ran down my spine as we continued on our journey. Halfway down the trail, my uncle suddenly stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness of the forest beyond. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, unmoving, his senses on high alert until, finally, he gave a curt nod and motioned for us to continue. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me as we pushed forward, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end with each passing moment. But I pushed aside my fears, chalking it up to my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. As we set out in our canoe, the gentle lapping of the water against the hull soothing my frayed nerves, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And when I followed my uncle's gaze to the shadowy depths of the woods, my heart skipped a beat at the sight of two pointy ears peeking out from behind a tangle of underbrush. But I brushed aside my concerns, convincing myself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a harmless woodland creature. That is, until my uncle began to regale me with tales of the Michigan Dogman, his voice low and filled with dread as he spoke of the creature's insatiable hunger for human flesh. As darkness fell and we made our way back to the safety of the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that hung heavy in the air. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder if we were truly alone in the woods, or if something more sinister lurked just beyond the trees, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting prey. I got in contact with former police officer Johnson. I met off Facebook. He was an officer living in Michigan for the last 20 years. This is his Dogman story. Officer Johnson was no stranger to the eerie silence that hung over the lakeshore at dusk. It was his duty to patrol the area, ensuring that the secluded spot, known for teenage parties and late-night rendezvous, remained clear of troublemakers. But on this particular evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Johnson would encounter something far more sinister than rowdy teens. As he parked his patrol car near the edge of the lake, his gaze swept over the familiar landscape, searching for any signs of activity. It was then that he spotted them. 4 dark shapes huddled by the water's edge, their forms obscured by the fading light. Curiosity piqued, Johnson stepped out of his car and approached cautiously, his hand resting on the handle of his holster. As he drew closer, the shapes began to take form, and a chill ran down his spine at the sight that greeted him. Standing before him were creatures straight out of his worst nightmares, dog-like in appearance, but with a sinister intelligence gleaming in their eyes. Johnson's heart hammered in his chest as he struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. Without hesitation, he retreated to his car and radioed for backup, his voice trembling with fear as he relayed the situation to his fellow officers. But by the time help arrived, the creatures were nowhere to be found, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread and disbelief. In the days that followed, Johnson's encounter would become the talk of the town, fueling rumors of a monstrous presence lurking in the shadows of the lakeshore. And though he tried to convince himself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a figment of his imagination, deep down, he knew that what he had witnessed that fateful evening was all too real. This story comes from a woman I met on Facebook, who is known around the Michigan area. She told me she lived on the outskirts of Michigan, which wasn't too far from where my family lives, so I took it upon myself to visit her personally. It was only an hour drive to her house, which was fine. As I sat across from Ruthie Rose in her quaint living room, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. Ruthie was a woman of strong convictions and unwavering skepticism, had called me here to discuss a matter that had haunted her for 15 long years. A chilling encounter with the Michigan Dogman. Her husband, a fervent believer in the existence of the creature, had spent years chasing elusive shadows and setting traps in the hopes of capturing proof of its existence. But Ruthie had always dismissed his obsession as nothing more than a desperate attempt to gain notoriety in a world that had long forgotten him. However, on that fateful night of December 20th, everything changed. The air was thick with anticipation as Ruthie recounted the events that had unfolded. A trap her husband set deep in the woods went off, she said. Her husband damn near leapt out of her chair and nearly tore through the door, sprinting outside. She followed right behind him. As they made the way half through the woods, she stopped in her tracks of what she saw. It was a dogman-like creature, with his head damn near all the way inside of the trip that was hanging on top of the tree. She said, "My husband took aim and point-blank shot this thing in the head. The cry that this thing let out was ungodly. When it finally went limp, I thought he was going to call the police or something, but instead, he decided to drag it all the way back to our house and into his basement so that he can study it." I looked at him like he was fucking crazy. "Are you fucking serious?" I told him. He ignored me while he drags this dead thing all the way back to our home. Our fucking home. At this point, I could tell she was building up with anger and disbelief. For months he was down in that fucking basement all day every day, and the smell was ungodly whenever I went to check on him. And as always, he ignored me. It's like he started caring more about that dead thing more than he cared about me anymore. When the whole story was over, with my now trembling hands and a heart filled with dread, she stood up, and I followed Ruthie into the backyard, where she instructed me to dig in the center of the yard. As I plunged the shovel into the earth, my mind raced with doubts and fears, but I pushed them aside, determined to uncover the truth. Minutes turned into hours as I dug deeper and deeper, the soil yielding reluctantly to my efforts. And then, at last, I saw it. A large bone protruding from the ground, its weathered surface a testament to the passage of time. As I continued to dig, my heart pounding in my chest, the truth began to dawn on me with chilling clarity. This was no ordinary bone. It was the skeletal remains of a creature long thought to be nothing more than a myth, a legend talked about for centuries. With a sense of dread creeping over me, I stumbled out of the hole, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had uncovered. Ruthie's eyes met mine, their depths filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation, and I knew then that her story was far from over. There was more to the whole story untold, for in that moment, as the truth lay bare before us, I realized that the Michigan Dogman was not just a legend. It was a living, breathing nightmare that lurked in the shadows of the woods. And as I looked into Ruthie's eyes, I knew that the horrors would not only haunt her again, but newer ones would now haunt me for days.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.